Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. My name is Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and with me this time I've got Jason Barnard of the show The Strange Brew. How are you doing, Jason?
Very good. Hi, Marv. Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is Jason of The Strange Brew.
So, how did you get introduced to podcast in the first place?
Well, I mean, going back, I've always been into music and that kind of thing, and I think the concept started to come on stream kind of about 15 years ago. But at that time, I didn't really have internet. Didn't really have kind of a place where I had internet or anything like that to any degree. But I think by 2008, 2009, bought my first house and obviously got internet and all that kind of thing. And I think my now wife had talked about me saying you should DJ and all this kind of thing. And I never liked that kind of DJ side because it's like to have to ask a venue and all that kind of thing. With as a podcast, it's like, well, I'll just play what I like and I'll do what I like. And if someone likes it, then that's fine, you know, anything's a bonus. So I'd started listening to Andy Morton of who'd done the Toffee Sunday Smash podcast, which played pretty obscure British psychedelic music, which is wonderful stuff. So I had the idea of doing a bit of that, but actually kind of playing some more commercial stuff from the 60s at the same time. And so then was trying to work out how you do a podcast. So this was kind of in the 2008-9 period. Not quite as easy then as it is now, where you can get packages and bundles. So it's all sort of self-hosted and widgets and things like that to get going. And then basically evolved over there. So it's about 10 or 11 years now.
Yeah, it's been a very long-lasting series with some incredible guests over that time.
Yeah, I think there's approximately 200 episodes, and then on top of that I've done written pieces with some of the same guests and some others as well, so there's a bit of a mix on the website and the podcast. A gamut of people, quite notable musicians and journalists from related to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and latterly I'm blending it up a bit with artists from the 80s, God forbid.
So how would you describe the show and how you came up with the creation of the show in the first place?
Yeah, so obviously, as you know, it's The Strange Brew, and Strange Brew being a very good cream song. Albeit I liked that sort of Strange Brew kind of terminology because that indicated that it was kind of a bit of a mix. And I think that's how I've kept it, but I've kind of branched out a bit more. So to go to the concept, originally it was predominantly 60s British, but it's branched out to be kind of a range of genres, often in the rock field, but broader than that. But a bit more of the sort of artist interviews now, predominantly as well, that kind of thing. But a bit more of a mix increasingly, because I don't purely want to mind that late 60s period, which is wonderful though.
So how do you actually choose the guest that you get and then arrange for them to talk to you for the shows?
Yeah, there's no particular plan that I've got. It is all a bit random, but I go through all different avenues. Sometimes I get approached, which is fantastic, of course, and that may be through record companies, management, PR companies, or I will get a mailing list and opportunities may arise, that kind of thing. But at the same time, connections on Facebook, possibly Twitter, speculative emails, and actually musicians who are friends with other musicians. So quite a number of my shows have come through. I'm close to this artists, I'm going to tell him to suggest that they be on your show if you'd be willing to have them on. So a recent example of that is that I've recently had Dave Cousins of Straubs on. So my next podcast, and I think we're discussing some of the stuff I've got over the next month, which is quite a lot. And I forgot to admit that I've got John Forbes, who used to be in Straubs, and various other fine groups on. So he's probably next, hopefully in the next couple of days. And that's all through kind of connections. So a myriad of things. I think it's important to, a bit like with the Strange Brew concept, to mix it up a bit. So it's not purely about all the musicians who are going through the PR companies who understandably have got something to sell or promote. Sometimes for me, it could be just a bit random, which makes things a bit more interesting.
Is it based on people who you admire yourself as musicians that you are a fan of personally?
Predominantly. Occasionally, I may not be familiar with the artist. I might dig in and actually gain an appreciation. I think at the very least, you've got to like the music, and you've got to have a passion for it, because ultimately that comes across into your audience. So there's got to be some connection there. Ideally, be a huge fan, which in most of the cases I am. But with 200, there may be some that I'm not as familiar, but grow an appreciation of.
Okay, so have you ever had a guest where you've arranged to have a guest, but at the last moment or whatever, just something's got in the way of being able to talk with them?
Yeah, I think I had Martin Fry of ABC. I think he got the flu.
Okay.
Andy Partridge, he never pulled out, but I think he did tentatively agree. But that never happened, and I do love XTC. And
That's a good catch.
Yeah, and I've had Colin Moulding on, and he was wonderful. Yeah. I bumped into Denny Lane in Las Vegas. This was in the very early days of the podcast. I mean, probably too early, and that never happened. But I think that's probably a bit too early in the show. So yeah, it does happen, and there's probably a parallel list of, almost as many shows that either I've tried for, didn't get, had tentative agreements, didn't happen, and in rare occasions it's been fixed up, and for whatever reason the stars have not aligned. But that's fine, because that's all part of setting things up and seeing if it happens.
True, but I'm guessing that you keep trying every now and again to see if you can get those interviews sorted.
Yeah, although I'm best not stalking Andy Partridge. Although I've got some of his contact details. I think after the second email, I'll probably get the message that he's probably working, hopefully, on some new material, which is probably better than speaking to me.
Yes. So how do you actually go about recording the shows and then editing them together?
So I always go through my PC, so Windows PC, and that all depends on what the mechanism of talking to the artist is. So traditionally, I most commonly use Skype. And Skype is good for calling phone numbers, landlines, mobiles, etc. And historically, that has been the most common way of reaching artists. Although that's had sort of mixed success in terms of the quality of the audio. Although it can be very good. And then if there's a bit of software that you can get online for Windows that sort of automatically records calls. And then I also have like a backup feed, which is the Audacity, that just records the whatever's coming in at the other end. I've latterly started to use Zoom a little bit, but that's not everyone uses that. And that's, as you know, has got a very, very good piece of inbuilt recording, which is perfect. So whatever I do, I'll try and use something to record both sides, but then I use the Audacity software as a sort of backup, because I have, on rare occasions, the software has failed and lost the interview. That happened with Eric Stewart of 10cc, where my piece of software recording both ends failed, but I had a backup, thankfully, which was very relieving. That's
good, because I enjoyed that episode as well, and I enjoyed the one you did with Graham as well, Graham Goldman.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to speak to them. I mean, 10cc is a band up there amongst any group, really. Brilliant songwriters, very groundbreaking in the studio.
So when you do select the songs for the shows, such as with Graham or with Eric or with anybody, how do you select those songs? And is it a two-way thing? Is it you and the artist themselves that choose those songs, or is it from yourself?
It will vary. If I have a lot of direct contact to the artist, I will I'll give them the option of typically reviewing a list of tracks for their input. Very, very rarely the artist will actually propose what they want to cover. I think Eddie Grant was quite like that. And then if it's more occasionally, if it's someone like, say, Tony Banks of Genesis, where you're just very grateful that they've got 20 minutes in their calendar to speak to you.
Definitely.
I won't spend time kind of covering tracks in detail, but I will tailor the content so it naturally refers to a track, and so that it's easy to drop something in, and also let the conversation flow that way. So all of the above, really.
Yeah, somebody like Tony who's really, really busy, you've got to just, I'm guessing, just get it over with and get as much information in that 20 minutes as you can, and then fit it around that, like you said.
Yeah, very much so. And in terms of why I choose the tracks, completely understandably, I'll always think about, well, especially if it's come from a PR company, well, what is the project that they are promoting at the minute? And so I will typically start and probably end the show talking about some of that material. And then in the middle, it's not purely the most prominent songs or greatest hits that I will always choose. Sometimes it will be thinking, well, how does this tell the artist's story? What interesting things would I want to know? Or what sort of interesting response would they give to that? So it isn't just like we just move from greatest hit to greatest hit type thing, because that doesn't necessarily produce the most interesting interview.
No, so that's true. I'm guessing, because if you pick a song that, say, well, we'll call it what a lot of people call it, a deep cut song that is not one of the hits, you might get a more interesting answer, because on the first part of that, it's not a song that people will normally talk to the person about, so they'll be surprised by that in the first place. And it might be a song that then they'll go into more detail or be more happier to talk about, because of the fact that it's rare that they ever get asked about these songs.
Yeah, I recall about as modern as I get was KT Tunstall. Okay. And I think at the start you could probably tell that she was probably thinking, who's this random guy talking to me? But actually, as the podcast progressed, she was aware that I was actually a fan of her work, or a certain period of her work. I think about a decade ago, she made a couple of quite moody and introspective albums, which are my favourite, rather than the sort of very sort of poppy commercial stuff. Yeah. And then that kind of immediately switched things and creates a completely different interview, rather than just sort of a PR type conversation.
Yeah, that's good. So, so do you, when you do your show, do you have a structure to it, or do you let the conversation just flow and come up with the questions and the structure just eventually you shape the show around that general conversation?
There's always a structure. There's always probably a song that I will try and sandwich in somewhere, but I don't straight jacket the interview, and I typically don't prepare questions. So I'll have a prompt for that period in the artist's career. I might have a song that I might just naturally sort of name drop. But it's not absolutely fixed, and there's always flex. And then depending on who the artist is, it might just go totally off piste, and then I'll have to work out how we pull together a podcast. Mike McCartney, Paul's brother, of the Scaffold, etc., who's kind of a natural sort of comedian, was kind of regaling me with random stories for about an hour and a half. And then you're thinking, so how do I get back to that point? Or Don McLean, no matter what name drop of a song I kind of mentioned, it sort of naturally then kind of started going back into American politics. But it's all interesting. It's all interesting, and I wouldn't want it purely to be kind of very always that regimented anyway. Sometimes you just got to let it flow and work out how you're going to create a podcast with music in. And I think that everything, all options are sort of open on the table.
So do you not have any notes at the side of you when you have these conversations?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you do?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. My memory's not that good that I will know off the top of my head. I mean, I think that's what takes the pressure off. It means that you're unlikely to go blank no matter who the artist is, because you can always move on to the next thing. But I typically don't prepare the questions, but I'll have a structure or prompts of topics or areas or songs to mention. Okay.
I'm going to go back to something you mentioned earlier on about people, just because I'm intrigued, because I heard recently the interview with Rod Argent, was it?
All right, yeah.
Yep. And so did his interview lead then to who was the other person from the
I've had Rod, Colin and Chris on over a period of years, and they weren't connecting, I don't recall. I think they were just through. I've got pretty strong connections and ties now with PR companies of the Zombies or friends of the Zombies, that kind of thing. So I don't think that they were. I don't think Rod told Colin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. When you are getting ready to interview these people or talk to these people, I don't like using the word interview. When you're getting ready to talk to these people, what research do you do and what resources do you use for that research?
If it's from a PR company, I'll always look at whatever the information that comes out from them as a starting point, and that will form certainly the opening section of the show. Look at their website, look at Twitter, look at what they're doing on Facebook, look at interviews and stuff they've done recently or in the past, look at any sensitive areas that probably is just not worth covering, and things that gets them passionate about or interesting points. I'll often buy if they've got a book, an autobiography, I will buy that. I will obviously dig very, very extensively into their back catalogue in great and painstaking detail. I'll often try and listen to almost all their material and things that they've been involved with. So I'll kind of absorb myself for a week into their material if I can, and interviews and everything that I can get hold of. It's a lot easier these days than it would have been, say, 20 years ago to do that. And it also means that you're more likely to be accurate in relation to that content, especially if you're drawing on things that the artists have said themselves in the past.
Okay. How do you avoid getting starstruck, or do you have any of that when you're meeting people who are particularly favourite artists that you love?
I think that comes with the preparation. So I think if you're prepared, I'm more worried that the IT will fail than the actual chat itself.
Okay.
I very rarely do them in person. I think if you're doing it in person, I'd certainly in the early time, I'd have probably been quite nervous. I'm probably less nervous now, just because if you do something a lot, even if it's typically remotely, you'll naturally be more comfortable with things. Yeah. So a lot of practice, really. But if you're prepared, there's nothing to be worried about, really.
Yep. Okay. Of the shows that you've done, are there any shows that have really stood out to you?
I'd probably miss. There's so many. The backstage with the Pretty Things about 7 years ago was a real joy, and obviously Phil May, sadly no longer with us.
Yes.
Alan Clark, when he was promoting his solo material about 6 years ago, was amazing. I think at the time he only did Radio 2 and me. He's done quite a lot more interviews in the past sort of 6 months now, but at the time I think it was Steve Wright and me for quite a long time. Jeff Emerick, Beatles engineer. I mean, that was just the late great. Yeah, that was just an honour, and to ask about Strawberry Fields and just, doesn't really get much better than that. Jim Lee of Slade, who basically went through every single Slade hit for 20 years.
That was quite a long. Yeah, that was quite a bit.
So that was great, because it wasn't just the sort of 20-minute, and the 20-minute ones can be great, but to have something so extensive is brilliant too. And then there's been kind of a bit more obscure things. So there was a songwriter called Paul Corder, who wrote songs for people like Roger Daltrey, and had an association with the Immediate label. And he was actually he was in very, very poor health. And in fact, I actually, when I was first talking to him or interviewing him or whatever you want to call, it wasn't even for a podcast. It was just for kind of a standard interview. Okay. But it was so interesting and sharing his memories and insights that it just naturally became a podcast. I mean, it's even more moving that, he's no longer here today, probably his final interview. So that was quite incredible and moving in a way. Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of sad thing, really, is that there's quite a number of artists that I've interviewed, that mentioned a few of them, that are no longer with us. And if it helps to share the music and their story and kind of keeps that on record, that's an honour on my side. And those shows in particular will always stand out.
Yeah, and I always get the impression that when you're talking to them, because of, like we've already mentioned, the songs that you'll choose to talk about, and then going really far back into the history, I think I get a feeling that they're happy when they're speaking to you as well, because they love telling you these stories about these songs and these anecdotes that they've got.
Absolutely. I may say this on the show, but I don't see each episode as my episode. I see it as their episode. I am purely a vehicle or an enabler to get their stories or information across, and the music. I'm just a link, an enabler, and that's all. I'm just that vehicle. So it's all about the artist for me. I've got no interest in, you know, it's not about me at all. It's all about the artist, and I think that comes across when I speak to them and anything in advance of setting up the show. I
think that, and I also think that some of the most interesting episodes that I've heard are of people like, you've mentioned him before, but I know you said that you'd not talked to him, but people like, you know, Denny Lane, where if you talk to him, he's one of those people who, he's got that career where he's always been there, and there's like these little anecdotes where you know that he's worked with McCartney and Wings, he's been with the Moody Blues, and then he's worked with Ginger Baker, Clapton, and he's always been there with these people, but they're these people that sort of almost like time forget about, for unfortunately, but you just know that they've got this story, and then when they come out with those stories on your show, these people, it's almost like gold dust in a way.
Yeah, there's been quite a few people like that. I've had Bob Henry, the drummer for Argent and the Kinks, and with his insight. People like Howie Casey, who goes all the way back to the Hamburg years, but also playing with Wings. And people like Mike Watson, who originally from Sheffield but became ABBA's second bassist.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit like Don McLean in a way, that I will just a thought will randomly come in my head, or I will see something and I'll just think, that could make a really interesting podcast. I'll just have a go at sending out an email kind of thing, or how do I contact that person? So, and that's where I talk about, it's not just about who's on the PR roster at the time, which again is fine, but actually I like to throw in these random episodes where I know that particular person's got such an interesting range of stories and insight into other incredible musicians.
Anyway, what other podcasts do you actually listen to yourself?
Nothing Is Real. The Beatles podcast is very good. I mean, they put me to shame in relation to the research, as well as Glass Onion as well, the John Lennon one. I think for me, although I do love the Beatles, it's not really. It's a bit of an obvious thing.
You and me both, as you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could do the same sort of thing. You know, I could keep mining that same well. I do like to keep things quite sort of varied. There's a very, very excellent podcast at the minute on Main Man. That was known as David Bowie's management company in the early 70s. That is very, very good. I'm not sure it's well publicised, but I would strongly recommend that. I think there's been about 9 episodes of that. Consequences, the 10cc podcast. It's similar to Nothing Is Real. Those guys will go into the depths of 10cc, and it's always very interesting. And they've done quite a few podcasts very recently with Graham Goldman, but very, very much kind of going into the detail of particular songs or periods, which has been very interesting. And then I'll occasionally dip into Rolling Stone Music Now. Although I won't listen to every show, because I think they cover completely understandably quite a wide range of artists, but they will get in some quite interesting acts and very, very big acts, and that's always quite interesting.
Okay. The Bowie one, do people just look that one up and is it called Main Man?
Yeah.
David Bowie.
I recommend that very, very highly. It's one of the best podcasts I've heard in a long time. It's a bit like a radio documentary format with audio archive material and interviews with all the people around at the time, going from kind of the Warhol era and into the height of David Bowie. And Dana Gillespie, who's wonderful, who's a peer of David's and an artist in her own right. I mean, she was great on it.
What advice would you give to somebody starting out in podcasting?
It's a cliche, but you've got to love it. You've got to love what you do. Don't do it for money. She's probably not going to make any.
You're not going to get any of that.
Not really. You're lucky to cover your costs, and that's absolutely fine. And I'm more than happy with that. So just find an angle, find something that you're passionate about. And because of the wonderful thing is that the internet and podcasting and all the providers that can get your podcast out there, there's billions of people. So out of those billions, you're likely to find an audience. It may be small, but that's good enough, and that is a joy. And for me, talking to musicians who made the music that has helped shape my life, it's not really much better than that. So you've got to love what you do, and I love doing the podcast.
I don't blame you for loving it either. Thank you for talking to me, Jason.
Thank you, Marv. It's been great to talk to you, and all the best with your podcast.
Thank you very much. I'll speak to you again soon, my friend.
Yeah, was that okay?
I think that was fine. Yep.
Is that all right?
Yep. Thank you for coming, and thank you to everybody for listening in to Pods Like Us, and hopefully I'll catch you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. I've got a few prompts because my memories can be a bit sketchy.
Yep.
My last one was the Beatles cover versions one with David Wells.
Yep.
But I've got three lined up over the next week, so it's quite busy. I've got David Gedge of The Wedding Present on Friday. I've got Rat Scabies of The Damned or Ex The Damned on Tuesday. Wow. Who else has come in? Someone come in today. Let's have a look. Martin Barr, formerly of Jethro Tull.
Oh yes.
So I think that's in the early stages of being sort of arranged, but could move quite quickly. I also need to think how I'm going to fit all of them in, because I've got a Jacko Jaksic two double podcast in the can that I need to edit and release as well. So quite a busy time over the next month.
Well, Martin and Jacko, you've got two prog secret weapons there with them two.
Yeah, a bit of a mix, a bit of prog, a bit of punk, and a bit of indie.
Yeah. Yeah, same with that as well. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let's get this started then, I suppose. If you're okay.
Yeah.